I want you to picture the bear.
And just so we're clear, right off the bat, we are not talking about a nature documentary here.
No!
We aren't talking about a grizzly roaming the Rockies or a polar bear on an ice floe.
Not at all. Although the man we're talking about today certainly had the temperament of one. We're talking about a nickname. A nickname earned by a man who dominated the 19th century British landscape with just absolute brute force. We are talking about Edward Ellice.
It's a name that might not ring a bell for everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, he isn't in the history books in the same bold font as, say, a prime minister or a king.
No, but in his time, he was everywhere.
He really was.
Exactly. This is a guy who was a merchant, a politician, a fixer, and a tycoon. He operated right at that murky intersection where global trade, collides with government power.
He is arguably the prototype for the modern power broker. The kind of person who doesn't just play the game.
No.
He changes the rules of the game while everyone else is still reading the instruction manual.
So here's our mission for this deep dive. We've pulled together biographical records, historical accounts of the fur trade, political archives.
A lot of material.
A lot of it. And we're going to try and figure out how one single man could control the Canadian fur trade, own massive sugar plantations in the Caribbean, orchestrate one of the biggest political reforms in British history, and have an entire island nation named after him, all while operating, for the most part, from the shadows.
It's a study in influence, pure and simple. And it all starts, appropriately enough, with that nickname, the Bear.
Right, so let's unpack the origin story. Edward Ellice is born in London in 1783, but this isn't exactly a started-from-the-bottom narrative, is it?
Oh, not at all. Not even close.
Yeah.
He comes from a merchant family with serious reach. His father, Alexander Ellice, had already purchased the Seigneurie of Villechauve in Canada.
So the path was already paved for him.
It was paved with gold, or at least, with land deeds, before Edward even took his first step. He goes to Winchester School, then Marischal College in Aberdeen.
So he's well-educated, well-connected, set up for a comfortable life in London society.
He could have been. He absolutely could have just managed the accounts. But in 1803, the family sends him to Canada, and that is where the Bear is born.
You really have to understand the Canadian fur trade at this time.
Yeah.
When we say trade, people might picture a friendly exchange of goods at a trading post.
Right, swapping some blankets for beaver pelts.
Yeah.
Everyone goes home happy.
It was nothing like that.
Not even remotely. This was essentially corporate warfare. You had these massive rival factions, specifically the Northwest Company and the Hudson's Bay Company, fighting for dominance over the wilderness.
And when you say fighting, you don't mean in court.
No, I mean burning down forts, seizing goods, and starvation tactics. It was brutal.
So Ellice steps right into a combat zone.
And he thrives in it. He becomes a partner in the firm, Finn, Ellice's and Inglis, which was heavily involved with another outfit, the XY Company. And here's where you see his first stroke of, well, genius. He's in his early 20s, right?
Yep.
Most people that age are just trying to figure out their career. Ellice is already looking at the map and realizing that all this competition is just inefficient.
So in 1804, he becomes a party to the union of the XY and the Northwest companies. He's already merging companies out on the frontier.
Exactly. But the violence didn't stop there. The sources describe a fierce struggle involving Lord Selkirk and the Hudson's Bay Company. It was violent, it was incredibly expensive, and it was just unsustainable.
This is where I want to pause on the how, because the history books say he negotiated the end of this war. But based on his personality, he didn't just ask them to shake hands, did he?
Oh, no. He weaponized the financial losses. He looked at the balance sheets. The Northwest Company was exhausted. They were bleeding money fighting the Hudson's Bay Company. So Ellice, along with the McGillivray brothers, William and Simon, orchestrated what is essentially the great merger of the 19th century trade world.
He basically went to them and said, you can keep fighting and go broke, or you can join me and own everything.
That is the bear tactic, right there. He mauled the opposition with logic and leverage. In 1821, he amalgamates the Northwest Company, the XY Company, and the Hudson's Bay Company into one giant monopoly.
Okay, let's frame that for you, because fur trade sounds so quaint. This is like if Google, Apple, and Amazon were currently at war hacking each other, burning down data centers, and then one guy stepped in and merged them all into one mega corporation that owned the entire internet.
That is a fair analogy. Maybe even an understatement, because Google doesn't have its own private army or legal jurisdiction over half a continent.
Good point.
The Hudson's Bay Company effectively did. And Ellice sits right near the top. He becomes the deputy governor. He wasn't just trading pelts anymore. He was designing the infrastructure of the colonial economy.
And his ambitions weren't just limited to Canada, were they? I saw a note here about New Zealand.
Yes, in 1825,
Yeah.
he becomes a director of the New Zealand Company. This was a venture chaired by his brother-in-law, John George Lambton. Their goal was the first colonization of New Zealand.
So you see this pattern.
A very clear pattern. He is consistently at the forefront of British expansionism. Whatever the empire is going, Ellice is there, usually holding the map.
But here's the thing that just blows my mind. Usually the guy running the massive colonial monopoly stays in the counting house. He counts his money. But Ellice pivots. He decides he needs political power too. Why? Was the money not enough?
In that era, commercial power and political power were two sides of the same coin. You couldn't really protect one without the other. If you want to maintain a monopoly, you need the government to enforce it.
So he goes to Parliament.
He served as the Member of Parliament for Coventry, and not just for a term or two. He held that seat from 1818 to 1826, and then again from 1830 all the way to his death in 1863.
Decades of influence. He literally died an MP.
And he wasn't just a backbencher warming a seat, waiting for a pension. Far from it. He was what we would call an insider's insider. He served as a whip in Lord Grey's government.
Okay, let's clarify whip for people who might not follow British parliamentary procedure. This is the enforcer, right?
Exactly. The whip's job is to make sure party members vote the way leadership wants them to vote. It involves pressure, deals, sometimes threats. It's a role that's perfectly suited for the bear.
And his connection to power was personal.
Very personal. He actually married into the Grey family. His first wife was Lady Hannah Grey, the daughter of Earl Grey.
The Earl Grey, as in the tea.
The very same. And, more importantly, the Prime Minister. So Ellice is literally family with the head of the government.
That explains how he became such a prime mover behind the Reform Bill of 1832. But this seems contradictory. The Reform Bill was about modernizing the electoral system, right? Giving more people the vote.
It was. It was about getting rid of rotten boroughs, places where a tiny handful of people, sometimes just one landowner, could elect an MP.
Right, like if a single cornfield in Idaho had the same voting power in Congress as all of New York City.
Precisely. It was a corrupt system. And here you have Ellice, the ultimate power broker, pushing for reform. But you have to ask why. He wasn't a radical Democrat. He was a pragmatist. He understood that the old system was so broken it was going to lead to revolution. If they didn't bend, they would break. So he used his bear tactics, bullying, cajoling, counting the votes, to force the aristocracy to give up a little power so they could keep the rest.
He also held some heavy government titles. Secretary to the Treasury. And then Secretary at War from 1832 to 1834.
And that role as Secretary at War is crucial. You see his fixer mentality coming out again. The British Army at the time was a mess of different departments and patronage networks.
Right.
Ellice proposed that all Army appointments should be made directly from his office.
So centralizing power.
Exactly. Taking it away from the scattered traditional methods and bringing it under a central bureaucratic control. It's the same playbook he used with the fur trade.
Yeah.
Consolidate, centralize control. He wanted the army to run like a corporation.
And speaking of consolidating influence, we have to talk about the Reform Club. Because when I hear club, I think of leather chairs and brandy, not political revolutions.
And it was both. Founded in 1836 with Ellice as the prime mover. This wasn't just a social hangout.
No.
It was the headquarters for the liberal political machine. Before this, political organization was loose. Ellice professionalized it. If you wanted to get anything done in Whig politics, you went to the Reform Club. It's like the modern equivalent of a K Street lobbying firm combined with a party headquarters. And Ellice was the man holding the keys.
There's one detail in the political section that really stood out to me as, well, almost spy novel material. The sources say he privately urged the French government to send troops into Spain in 1836.
That detail is wild, isn't it? It's a perfect example of how his influence transcended borders. He wasn't acting as the foreign secretary there.
Right.
He was acting as Edward Ellice. He felt comfortable telling a foreign government, France, a historical rival, to invade a neighbor because he thought it was the right strategic move.
That is a staggering level of arrogance.
Or confidence. He viewed himself as a player on the world stage, independent of the government he served. He was operating above the nation-state level.
Okay, so we have the fur baron and the political fixer. He's modernizing democracy, he's fixing the army, he sounds like a progressive hero, but we need to pump the brakes because there is a massive, ugly contradiction in the files that we have to address.
We cannot talk about 19th century British wealth without talking about the Caribbean. And Ellice was heavily invested.
And we aren't talking about a few shares in a shipping company. The sources say he was a co-owner of 8 sugar estates.
8. Across Grenada, British Guiana, Tobago, and Antigua. This was industrial-scale agriculture.
Right.
And of course, up until the 1830s, that agriculture was powered entirely by enslaved people.
This is where the whole liberal reformer image just falls apart for me. He's in Parliament fighting for the Reform Bill, fighting for representation, while simultaneously owning human beings on the other side of the Atlantic.
It is a deep moral chasm. But for men like Ellice, liberty often meant the liberty to protect property. And enslaved people were viewed legally and economically as property.
And this is where the timeline gets really cynical. Ellice is in government during the exact time the British government is moving toward the abolition of slavery.
That's right. And when emancipation finally happens, it came with a catch. A very expensive catch. The British government agreed to compensate the owners for their loss of property.
Not the enslaved people who had been exploited for generations.
No, the owners. And the bear got paid.
He did. The records show Ellice received £35,000 in compensation. That was for the liberation of over 300 enslaved people.
£35,000 in the 1830s? I'm trying to do the inflation math in my head, but that is millions in today's money.
It is a fortune. It represents a massive transfer of public wealth to private hands, and it highlights a critical mechanism of the British Empire. Even when social progress happened, like the end of slavery, the merchant class ensured they didn't lose out financially. Ellice pivoted from fur to sugar, and when the sugar labor system collapsed, he took a government payout. It's the ultimate hedge. It really solidifies the idea that for him, everything was a transaction. Politics, war, human rights, it all ends up on a balance sheet.
Exactly. He wasn't an ideologue. He was a capitalist. If the market for beaver pelts is down, merge the company. If the market for sugar is changing, take the buyout.
So what does a man like this do with all that money and power? He's won the game. Does he retire?
No. He doubles down on dominance. He lives like a tycoon. He buys the Glencoich estate in Lochaber, Scotland in 1838.
And he doesn't just buy a little cottage.
No. He hires Alexander Ross, a prominent architect, to build a massive lodge. And this lodge becomes a revolving door for the elite. Artists, writers, diplomats, statesmen, everyone came to visit the bear in his den.
It was a place where business was done over whiskey and hunting.
A lot of hunting.
But the thing that really earned him the nickname wasn't just his personality, it was his sporting habits. The numbers here, I honestly had to read them twice.
They're industrial. He was a tenant at the Invershi estate, and the game books record his kills. Over a 7-year period, he shot 14,560 grouse.
Wait, hold on. 14,000 in 7 years?
Yes.
That's roughly 2,000 birds a year. If you account for the seasons, he must have been shooting dozens of birds every single day he was out there. That's not hunting.
That's slaughter.
It's an extermination.
And don't forget the rest. 810 ptarmigan, 146 blackcock, and 34 deer. It sounds less like sport, more like a harvest.
It sounds obsessive.
It was. He attacked leisure with the same intensity he attacked the fur trade. He needed to dominate the landscape. In fact, he was so intense that he became a nightmare for the locals.
The sources mention he was considered a problem tenant, which is hilarious considering he was one of the most powerful men in the empire.
Yes. Sir George Macpherson Grant, the owner of the estate, actually complained about him. Ellice's sporting activities were so aggressive, they were disrupting the farming tenants.
Trampling crops, disturbing livestock.
He essentially acted like he owned the place, even when he was just renting.
It's very the bear, isn't it? Just barging through, taking what he wants. And if a few farmers' crops get ruined, well, that's just the cost of doing business.
It fits the psychological profile perfectly. Dominance over the landscape, whether it is the Canadian wilderness, the Caribbean plantations, or a Scottish moor. He consumes resources. That is what he does.
Now, despite being a figure from the 1800s, his name hasn't completely disappeared. You can actually still find Ellice on the map today.
You can, and in some pretty surprising places. Most notably, the Ellice Islands.
Which most people would know today as
the independent nation of Tuvalu. They were formerly part of the Gilbert and Ellice Islands colony.
It's a fascinating legacy. A tropical island nation in the Pacific, named after a man who made his fortune in the frozen Canadian North.
It just shows the reach of his network.
And speaking of Canada, his name is still all over the geography there, too.
Oh, absolutely. You have the rural municipality of Ellice in Manitoba. You have Fort Ellice, which was a major trading post. And if you have ever driven in Winnipeg, You might have driven down Ellice Avenue.
It's a testament to just how deeply embedded the Hudson's Bay Company was in the founding of Western Canada. These guys weren't just traders, they were the founding fathers of the infrastructure.
And his legacy continued through his family as well. His son, Edward Ellice Jr., also sat in Parliament. And Ellice himself remained connected to the highest levels of nobility until the very end. His second marriage was to Anne Amelia Leicester, the widow of the Earl of Leicester.
So he starts as a merchant's son and ends up married to a countess, having reshaped the army, the fur trade, and the map of the world.
It is a complete trajectory of 19th century British power.
So let's try to summarize the bear. When you look at all the source material, what is the picture that emerges? Because he's not a villain in the cartoon sense,
No.
but he's certainly not a hero.
No, he's something more complex. He is the embodiment of the British Empire's operating system. He combined aggressive commercial expansion, that's the fur and the sugar, with political reform at home. He understood that to keep making money, the government needed to be stable and efficient. He didn't fix the system because he loved democracy.
No, he fixed it because a broken system is bad for business.
Exactly. And he lived a life of immense privilege and consumption, literally extracting resources from every corner of the globe.
He's the operator, the guy who merges the companies, writes the bylaws, and centralizes the appointments.
Precisely.
It really makes you think. We tend to focus on the kings and queens, or the prime ministers, the people giving the speeches. But Edward Ellice suggests that the real power lies with the people who own the infrastructure.
Yes.
The people who are in the back room at the Reform Club deciding who gets to be the prime minister.
I think that is the key takeaway. The Edward Ellices of the world are the ones who actually pour the concrete that the rest of us walk on.
So here is a thought to leave you with. Edward Ellice was nicknamed the Bear for his trade dealings. But looking at his ability to merge giant companies, reshape the military from the inside, and found the clubs where the elite made their decisions, was he actually the architect of what we now call the establishment?
And it begs the question.
How many Edward Ellices are out there right now? People whose names you might not know, who aren't on the cover of magazines, but who essentially own the infrastructure of our world.
That is a very unsettling but a very important question. Who is the bear of the 21st century?
Something to mull over next time you look at a map. Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.